Hi everyone, this is Sarah from Revive Israel, and I'm here with Asher today. And you know, we've been seeing all over the news Trump's deal of the century that came out not too long ago. It's making headlines, everyone's talking about it, everyone's upset about it. It's affecting the security situation in Israel, and we're all wondering, what should we think about it? What's going on here? So we're here to actually find out. Asher, what do you have to share with us about it? How can we understand what's happening in Israel in light of this?
Well, thanks, Sarah. What we wanted to do here, we already did a brief video and just asking for prayer on this, but we've had so many people asking us questions. I thought we would take a little bit of time and actually go through some of the points, point by point, and share what is difficult, because here on the ground in Israel, politically, real estate-wise, it's all very complicated. And we thought, let's just really go start with the spiritual things, go through right down the real estate, the history, the politics, and then end up with a little bit of end times prophecy and just go right through it.
Sounds good. I'm in for it.
Well, listen, the first thing we wanted to say was that regardless of a political proposal, before that, it's actually a historic declaration. And the historic declaration itself was very powerful. It's so powerful that whether you're for it or against it, I feel it was on the size, it was gigantic. It was on the level of the Balfour Declaration or the November 29th vote in the UN or Truman supporting Israel. It was the President of the United States making a statement. He's already made a few others, like supporting Jerusalem, the Golan Heights, territory claims, but to make the statement that he did about this peace plan was taking a side on the side of history, which is enormous. Is enormous, and a lot of what he said on that regard was biblical. I think for us as Bible believers, as Messianic Jews, on that side of it, we're totally for it. The questions, the complications come in more in the political practicalities of it, which we'll get into. Right. Let's just take one more moment about that, because one of the things that he said is that there are historic claims for the Jewish people on the land of Israel. In other words, he was saying history going back a couple thousand years. He's saying it's not just post-Holocaust, and it's not just what happened since 1967, 1948. He dealt with the longer history. That's a huge point that has been overlooked. It tends to be overlooked also in the discussions in the United Nations. He brought that in. The second thing he said was that the Jewish people have a biblical claim, that it's not just politics. There are, for Jews and Christians, there are, for their values of faith, there is a faith claim to this land. Now that's important, because what's happened before is in some of the, what I would call postmodern moral equivalency that goes on in the UN and in the media, it's as if you allow the Muslim extremists to take a divine religious value, and that's okay for them to say it, but it's not okay for Jews and Christians to say that. So he's saying, look, this is a biblical, faith-based imperative for both Jews and Christians.
Wow.
Now whether you are an atheist or Jewish or Christian or Muslim, it doesn't make any difference, because even if you disagree with it, it's putting it on the same footing, which is the right connection. Because if you just
validating the Bible.
Yeah. So, well, even if you're not validating the Bible, I'm saying you're saying we're discussing absolute values versus absolute values, that we have a conflict.
Yeah.
Because if what you're saying is that the Muslims have absolute values and the Jews and the Christians are not, they're just secular humanists and moral equivalencies, then it's just, you continue to back up. And he's saying that's not right. So we put the discussion on the right level. That's a huge point. And it was a brilliant point. I also want to say that he's backing this up by saying that at the same time that the United States and Israel are going to fight Islamic terrorism and Islamic State dominionism. Now those two things are different. I just want to touch upon them. And what he's saying is that if we want to talk peace solution, it has to come by saying no to these other things. He's saying we're not going to back away because of terrorism, and we're not going to back away because of a vision of Islamic State. This is very important, because even the name that's used in Arabic and in the Islamic world for Jerusalem is Al-Quds, the holy place. In other words, when they're making, even like the El Quds Brigade, so they're saying for them, this is a religious absolute for them. Well, he's saying, listen, you can't demand for this side to speak political compliancy, and you're talking absolute Islamic State dominionism. You can't. Let's not argue that. And so he's saying, let's take Islamic dominionism and Islamic extremist terrorism off of the chart. And he's backing that up by having also killed Baghdadi and also Soleimani, that is saying, listen, we're going to stop. We're not going to back off because of the military threat. So let's deal with the issues on a level playing ground.
Wow, which is exactly against what terrorism is trying to do in bringing fear to quiet down people and paralyze them, saying you can't stand up against us.
Right. Yeah. Now I'm saying, even if afterwards you want to say you don't agree with the plan, but the principle that you can't be talking religious extremism on one hand and a United Nations liberal discussion on the other hand. You can't give Islamic extremists the freedom to use their total black and white values and then ask the Jews and the Christians to retreat to a relative moral standard. So let's talk one or the other and make that happen. Now, so this was a huge statement, and it's backed up by the American military and economic force. I think all those aspects of it, from my personal view, was 100% correct. I think it was historic. It's a blessing. And because of that, I think it's actually going to, because of that declaration, in the long run, is going to cause much more of a settling in the Middle East. Although there may be upheavals now, but I think in the long run, that's creating the correct framework for dealing with the situation, which will cause more economic and political stability in the long run.
Wow. So you're saying even like these prophecies we heard about God using Trump as a trumpet to release a voice of truth is actually coming to pass, not just.
Well, I don't want to lift it up to that level at this point. I'm going to say because I want to. There's a complicated situation, so I'm saying the principles that he said in the way he announced his position. From my point of view, that was very, very solid and very strong. Now, let's go on. Let's work moving toward the political side. And I want to say also, people say politically, are you for this or against it? First of all, we want to say that it is very complicated. This is not a simple issue. It's a complicated issue. So any political solution is going to be complicated. And we actually believe that there is no political solution. It's not going to be solved. The Middle East is going to be in conflict all the way until Yeshua comes back. That's why we preach the gospel. Ultimately, there's only one peace plan, and it's not from Donald Trump, it's from Yeshua, the Messiah, who is the Prince of Peace. When he comes back, there's going to be a real peace plan. So
that's
ultimately,
the deal of the millennium.
That's the deal of the millennium, right? Not just the deal of the century. That was good. We didn't plan that. Now, so we want to say that, of course, any political situation here is going to fail. So there is a limited factor here, but that's not asking whether this approach is going to help the situation or not. So I want to let's look at a few ways in which they analyze the situation, and then we'll get to the political solution itself.
Sure. Yeah.
Now, one of the things I wanted to mention is that because of Donald Trump's kind of unique style, people don't realize, I think, that the depth of the analysis that went into these things, when you listen to what actually he stated. Now, whether you're for it or against it, it was not a simplistic, it was not a brainless analysis. There were deep analysis and deep principles that he stated in going through this, and I want to go over some of those principles. It was not a superficial statement. There were deep things that were being said. Now, I didn't read the whole 180 pages. I'm just talking about what he stated in his declaration.
Yeah.
Right. Now, one of the things he said, which was a fascinating principle, was that when you have to deal with a complicated, he said it like a business deal, a complicated deal, you have to go into the details and deal with the nuances of the details. And he's saying they and their team did that. Now, you can disagree with their conclusion, but the idea of saying that to come to a conclusion here, some kind of proposal, people are going to have to go through every single detail and deal with the nuances. That was an amazing statement to make. In addition, he said, and of course he said it in his style, he said, well, I'm a businessman, I do real estate. Okay, that may have sounded funny to someone, but he's making a very important point here. The problems here are points of real estate. And he said, and we went through it, real estate, city by city, town by town. We looked at all the real estate. Now, you can come and say you totally disagree with the conclusions that they came to, but the fact that they said they went through not only the nuances of the details of the discussion, but went through and dealt with it on a real estate basis, walked through the land and dealt with how to do that, and came up with proposals town by town, that's a brilliant thing to say. And I don't think that's superficial at all.
Sure, and he's not also the first one to do that. That's how the borders were drawn even before the founding of the State of Israel. That's how we got the proposal of the 1948 founding of the State of Israel's borders.
Now, it's an interesting comment to make there, is that both in the United Nations statement of 47 and in the borders and the Declaration of the State in 48, the most of the Arab communities around the area hugely fought it. Now, what was the partition of the land then was much less than it is now.
Sure,
it's almost too bad that they didn't accept it back then.
Yeah.
But the lack of acceptance, and that's even something that Kushner said. He said, "Listen, if you don't accept the deal on the reality of the land now, the situation is going to get worse for the Palestinians, not better." Now, whether that's worse or better, but that's a true fact. That the longer it keeps going on without a deal, and the longer it keeps going on with the Jewish state growing, it's not getting better for the Palestinians. So that was another point that was raised up there, which was a profound thought in dealing with it. But what I wanted to mention was on those previous deals, there was huge opposition from the surrounding nations. Now, one of the things to notice, now it's just been a couple of weeks, in some sense, there's been a lot of upheaval against this proposal. There was a statement by almost a unanimous vote from the Arab League, some very harsh statements from the Palestinian Authority and so on. But on the other hand, it hasn't been that harsh. There hasn't been any war, there hasn't been an invasion, and actually the major Arab countries here, which are Egypt and Jordan and Saudi Arabia, have actually made somewhat moderate statements here. So some of the alarmist responses to this are not actually true. Because I think what's happened is over the years is some of the larger nations around in the area, they're not interested in pushing an ultimatum, a Palestinian ultimatum of taking back over the state of Israel and taking back over Jerusalem and taking over Tel Aviv. They're not interested in that. That's not what people are concerned about in Egypt and Saudi Arabia today.
They want up against a bigger enemy right now. Also,
well, not just because of Iran. They're interested. They have their own economic problems. They have. They want to be able to live. Now, that's actually maybe a good thought. It's kind of a practical thing. It's a realistic way to look at it. But people are saying, listen, we need to come to some kind of solution. And having a total dominionist viewpoint that we're going to throw all the Jews out and we're going to take over and we're going to move back into our homes in Tel Aviv. Look, it's not going to happen. And so, and if that's the position, then it's never going to work. So let's go on. Another thing that Trump said in this is that to the best of their ability, they would not move any Jews or Arabs out of their homes.
Yeah, I didn't understand that. How can you do that?
Well, that's why he had such a complicated map.
Yeah.
Because he was saying, and this is a principle. Now, let's say you might not agree with the principle, but it's not a superficial and it's not a stupid principle. You may think it's a wrong principle, but it's a profound thing. He said, I want to address the situation as basically trying to draw the geographical boundaries where people live today. Because it's saying if you're going to drive Jewish people out of their homes, you're going to drive Arab people out of their homes, it's not going to work. So he said, let's begin to deal with the situation as it is now. Now that is a historic position to take. You may totally disagree with it and say, no, I think the Jews have to give back land because this is going to be what it may be. But don't say that was a superficial comment to make. That was huge. And that's why you saw the maps that they were putting up were so patchwork, because what you saw on that map was where Arabs live and where Jews live. That is a profound thing to say, and that's part of the complications in it.
And it's complicated also to create the bridges and transportation and connecting each little patchwork part of the country.
Right.
Then.
And that's what is that the bad part of the plan or is that the good part of the plan?
Right,
In other words, the bad part of the plan is you say, this will never work. On the other hand, it's a complicated situation, and you can't have a simplistic solution to a complicated situation. Now, of all the places, geography-wise, where it's most difficult, and I want to mention a specific area. It's a place that's called the Triangle. We know it in Hebrew as al-Fachen, which is an area across from Netanya, and it's an area of a large Arab population, and it goes westward very close to just a few kilometers from the sea. In other words, between the area of al-Fachen and the sea, the Jewish settlement there, that's the narrowest place. So you have the narrowest place of Jewish settlement and a huge Arab settlement there. Now it's interesting, this is an area that today, that these people have, for the most part, Israeli citizenship. Whereas they're not, it's considered not Palestinian territories, it's considered part of Israel. But politically, for the past 20 years, the people in the al-Fachen area, for the majority, have been very, how can I say it, sort of Palestinian agenda pushing and very against the state of Israel and against cooperation. Now, what Trump proposed there was that area would just be defined as part of the new Palestinian state. So what happened was these people were the ones who were most upset. So they said, well, we don't want to become part of a Palestinian state. We have all our rights here in Israel. We're much better off than being in Israel. Well, okay, what is that saying? Now, that may be right or wrong, but it's pushing an issue. In other words, are you going to be part of the Israeli state? Or are you going to be part of the Palestinian state? It's highlighting a contradiction here. Sure. Of one of the many very difficult, complicated issues. This is one of them. And maybe some of our listeners aren't even aware of that area. But anyone here in Israel, you would know that. We would all know that. Yeah. The al-Fachen area is one of the more difficult areas to deal with.
Where there's the largest Palestinian flag flying in one of the villages?
It could. And just the very geography and demography of the situation is almost impossible.
Wow. Are they able to even say we prefer to be in the Israeli state without bringing harm on themselves? There's a little sensitivity.
That's an issue. Now, I would say, here's the thing, is whether this is politically right or wrong, it's forcing that issue. Yeah. Now, maybe you want to say it's better not to force these issues. Maybe we should not talk about it. But Trump's attitude, right or wrong, is if you don't deal with the issues, you're never going to get them solved. So he's pushing that one of the most difficult issues is the al-Fachen area, the Triangle area, the Mishulash area, and he's saying let's deal with it. And he's saying I'm proposing if it's a large Arab population and they're having basically anti-Israel attitude and want to be pro-Palestinian, so let's define that as part of the Palestinian state. Okay, that's pushing an issue. I also want to note here that this is a proposal. It's not a conclusion, it's a proposal. He's saying, here's my proposal, let's debate it. Come talk to me about it.
Right, and you're saying that the citizens of that area stood up against it, saying we prefer actually to be in the Israeli state?
Yes, for sure. And you can understand that, and that's part of the very contradictions. And it's a potential contradiction why this peace plan might not work. I'm only trying to describe what the complications are right now. That's one of the more difficult complications. But understand what the principle involving not moving Jews or Arabs and taking a large Arab population that has a Palestinian identity and is against the state of Israel, defining that as part of the Palestinian state. Listen, you can't say that doesn't have a logic to it. You might be against it and say it won't work, but let's understand that this is not a superficial set of proposals.
Which also, it just brings up another interesting point. Would there be Arabs within the Israeli part that would want to move into the Palestinian state?
Yes. From what we've seen, we haven't seen very many people that have said that. Yeah. It's kind of been the opposite.
The other direction.
One of the things, of course, that Trump said and the Israeli government has said all along was that the areas of the Palestinian state have to be demilitarized. Because ultimately the Jewish people in Israel are, from the most part, are willing to yield on territory. But they can't yield on having an area where weapons can be moved in, and 10 years from now there would be a huge war in which hundreds of thousands of people would be killed. So they're saying that has
Gaza multiplied by
a
lot.
Well, in Gaza has a that's why it has a military closure on it, not for commerce, but only for weapons coming in. Now, what it's saying is, so Trump's position on that was, we have to demilitarize the Gaza and the West Bank and give a security strip running along the Jordan River, which basically those aspects would guarantee Israeli military security. And again, you can be against this or for this, but just logically, there is no way that there will be peace if there isn't a demilitarization of the Palestinian state area and a security strip running along the Jordan River. If not, it's just a matter of time until there will be a huge war and hundreds of thousands of people will be killed. So we have to take this in mind. And this is not a fantasy, because just above our northern border, we just finished the Iran-Iraq-Syrian war there, in which over 600,000 people were killed. So this is not. This is what's at stake. This is what at stake here is finding a situation that can give security. Now.